Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about shot execution issues. And shot execution issues is kind of a nice way of saying that word that we don't really like to say very much. So in order to just kind of get started so we can just jump right in, I'm just going to say it, target panic, right? Okay, so it's kind of a thing, people treat it like it's a disease. If we talk about it, we're going to catch it, right? It's not a lion stalking in the bushes, waiting to jump out on you, on your, right in the middle of your best game ever, and all of a sudden, I got the target panic, right? You can't get it by watching somebody jerk their trigger. Sometimes it might feel like it. If you've ever been on the tournament line and saw somebody's stabilizer go like that, it's like, oh man, oh no, right? You can actually talk about it. You can study it. You can find out why this has come up on this particular person or yourself or whatever. But basically what it is it's habits that you've created accidentally by skipping developmental steps as you learn how to shoot a bow. So essentially what happens is everybody who learned how to shoot archery, they walked into a pro shop and they said, I was really thinking about archery. And they go, you know what, this archery is really cool. Here, let me show you how to do this. Here's a compound bow. And this is the sight, and this is a release. Let's get this strapped on your wrist here. And just walk over in the archery range, and here's how this works. This is the trigger, and you're going to pull it back like this, and then just, put your finger on the trigger, and then put the pin in the middle. Use the top pin there, and put the pin in the middle, and then squeeze the trigger. That all seems reasonable. Everybody in here started that way, right? Okay? And the problem with that is there's a disconnect because we don't know how to shoot a bow. And that's the thing, a lot of people don't realize when they're showing somebody how to shoot because we forgot about that step. We forgot that the first time we touched a bow, we had no concept of form, draw length and anchor point and back tension and all that good stuff that makes a bow be still. We had no concept of that at all. So the one major disconnect in how we learned how to shoot a bow is that we can't put the pin in the middle of the target. So we can't squeeze the trigger, right? So it ends up, I'm going to try to just demonstrate this. Let's see here. Okay, here we are. So it kind of works out like this, right? The first time you try it, right, so there we go. Oh, it looks like it's going to be like crazy. Let's see, I'm going to try something. Let me try, computer panic. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So the first time we try something, they say, all right, now just put the pin in the middle of the target and squeeze the trigger. So we end up working on it like this. We go, okay, I'm going to get this thing in here. Hang on just a minute. I got it. That first shot with the guy, he's hit full draw for 120 seconds, trying to make this work. And then he kind of gets it over there. Okay, come on, man. I'm going to wedge you in the middle. Bang. And then he shoots it when it gets there. So that's our first experience. So from the very first shot out of the bow, we pull the bow back and we're trying to hit a bullseye. We're not trying to learn how to operate the equipment, right? Nobody ever really learns how to use the stuff before they start trying to hit something. Everybody's seen it. You get the adults that come in for your adult archery class and they get the little wooden bows and then they pull the wooden bow back at 7 yards and they try to hit the bullseye and they go, when they miss it. And you're like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm still trying to hit that. You didn't get it for the first day. You should quit now, right? So that's kind of how we approach how to do that. And that's why we end up with this issue. This is why this pops up, because we sort of preload it based on how we learned how to shoot a bow. So the progression, I'll just quickly kind of go through this. The progression ends up as you begin to learn how to shoot, how to at least pull the bow back, and you get some degree of control, right? So you'll get set up and you'll get here and then you'll kind of orient and then just kind of bink, and then you let it go right when it touches the middle. And then you start hitting it a good bit in the middle. And pro shop guy or league buddies go, bro, you're hitting this pretty good. This is awesome. You're pretty good at this. Here, let me show you how to score this target and let's see what you can do. So they show you how to score the target, and then that's the first time that you do this. You'll get on there and go, zzz, and then bing, and let it go right there when it gets there. So then your score quickly raises. Everybody's seen it, big chunks of improvement. You're like up in the high 280s, low 290s on a Vegas target, right? It's like, man, this is awesome. You're smoking good at this. You should go to Vegas, right? So then what they end up doing then, they're trying to push that score up higher, and the brain, this is where the first thing happens. The brain goes, hold on a minute. Don't just go rushing up in the middle. Ease in there. Let's be cautious about this. Let's try to hit more of these X's. Let's just ease up in there and get it still. So that's when you'll run right up to the edge and stop and then ease it in there. After a while, the brain goes, you know what? I've noticed that your finger touches the trigger just as soon as your eyeball sees it, and I'm not quite ready to shoot yet. So let's hold it just outside of center so we can get ready to get ready. And that's when we end up with the pin stuck outside the middle. Who knows what I'm talking about? Right, go on and raise your hand now. Go on now, all right. So everybody's like, no, that's not me. Anybody else? Yeah, I didn't think anybody in here had that problem. Right, so that's kind of how that's kind of the basics of how that habit develops. So detecting an issue, like how many of you are running a program, you've got kids, you're trying to create a high performance program or something like that, or you have people that you supervise their archery. So the faster that you notice that this is it's beginning to happen, or because we know that everybody learns how to shoot a bow in the way that I just pointed out, you will just start them off when they go. I let the kids, when they come in the program, I let them shoot for fun. But when they go, I really want a higher score. What do I need to do to get on the team? And I go, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff you got to do. So let me show you the first step. Here's what we got to do. And then that's the point where I just make them stop doing what they're doing, and I start teaching them the individual pieces of the shot process without all the other parts. And I slowly put that together as they learn the individual skills, then we blend the steps together. But I only do it after. I let my kids just hit the trigger, have fun, wing arrows, and I didn't stand there and belabor form and all that stuff, so they would love archery, because the kids in your program or your own kids, they have to fall in love with it first, because the hard work to being the #1 junior in their category, the hard work part sucks. So they gotta love it or they're not gonna stick with it, right? So you gotta make them fall in love with it first. But the faster that you start working on it, right? The faster that you start working on it, the easier it is to get ahead of it and make it work. And you get least disruption to their scores. They don't have to hibernate and stay away from target archery too long while they get it all put together, because most kids won't tolerate, look, we got to shut this down. We're not going to the state. We're not going to sectionals. We're not going to Vegas. We got to get this taken care of before we get back. Most kids are like, I'm going. No, we're not stopping. So catching it early is important. So the first thing that you see yourself, if you're watching your scores or how your arrows group, the first thing you'll see is for right-handed shooters, reverse everything if you're a lefty, but you'll begin to notice that outlier, that miss, that's just a little bit high right or low right. So the reason that that works that way is when your front hand figures out what your back hand is doing, and when you go, I want the pin to be right there, go. So you can kind of see how that'll make a right-handed shooter hit to the right. Left-handed shooter goes left. Now, everybody has seen that, or when it gets really bad, it starts to go out there. When it finally came and found me, I was missing the bail high and right. It was embarrassing. It was so bad you could smell it, right? So another one is you'll have a shooter, he's dead center. X, 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 boom, right? And you guys have seen the overly stylish follow-throughs of today, right? Where it's like the head follows the hand, like, y'all have seen those, right? Can you imagine me doing this, why my arrow would hit there, right? So that's why that works that way, because that form or follow through, if you watch your kids, look, without your bow, just take your hands and show me how you shoot the bow. You'll see them go like this. And you can clear up a lot of form issues and mistakes by going, why is this moving? That doesn't move. Why does your head do this? Don't do that. It should just go. All the rest of everything should stay still so that they can, while they're mimicking shooting a bow, they can pre-program the actions that they need to go through, which is this just stays. It has to actively stay. It can't passively stay. It has to actively stay on target, right? So you can teach that while they're just pretending to shoot bow, and they teach this hand to just stay there, right? So as coach, when you're watching them shoot, you can watch the elbow tip, you can watch bow hand fingers, you can stand back and just kind of watch the whole picture. Oftentimes it's really subtle, even with very high performing archers who have a really high X count, who are very high in their age category. You see this moment. It's almost, the way that I describe it to them is, I can see you shooting the release. We should just start working on this. And what that means is that you see this like intention to release. You see everything is sort of fluid and moving, and then suddenly it stops as the release fires. You can watch the end of the stabilizer and you can see how they approach the target. You can see the stabilizer wheedling around in the middle. You can watch their brain work just by looking at the end of their stabilizer rod. And you can see exactly what's happening, because the end of the stabilizer rod, for coach, it telegraphs everything that the shooter does and magnifies it, right? So I often watch shooters that set their shot up, raise the bow, draw the bow back, anchor the bow, all the while watching the end of their stabilizer so you can see where the pressure is directed, how they're approaching the target, how well that they're setting their alignment shot to shot. You can see all that stuff before they ever let go. Then you can make a prediction based on what you saw. Where do I think this arrow is going to hit? And then when their bow goes off, you watch them move first, then look down at the target. Did the arrow hit where you thought it was going to hit? And if I'm right 2 or 3 times in a row, I'll walk up and say, okay, so let's work on this little thing that I see here. But if I'm right once out of 10 shots, I don't say anything at all. I just let it go, right? So oftentimes the that step of clearing out your target panic is a rite of passage. We've seen a lot of top shelf pros recently deal with it on world level stage. They get the yips right there on camera. You know, you see that they qualify insanely high during the qualification rounds, but then they shoot 8s in the finals, right? So the reason that it's kind of a rite of passage is that everyone has to clear that step. You have to learn all the pieces, and you have to get really good at all the pieces in order to get as good as you can possibly be. And if you don't, you'll hit that particular spot on the graph that is, what is your basis of skill, right? How high do you want to shoot, and how much practice do you do, and all of those things kind of meet together on the graph. And that step that you skipped is the one that you need to get farther down the graph. That's when you end up with the disconnect that your sight misbehaves or your release misbehaves. And we all know the release won't shoot, right? It's the release, that pesky release. You know, I just can't make this shoot, so I'm gonna pull out this new whatever, and it'll work. It'll work until it gets mad at you and it quits working too, right? So here's kind of a real world example. This is my son, Quinn. He's 12, and he showed up to the National Outdoor Championships and shot, I forget what his exact score. It was like a 704, 706, something like that. And USA Archery took some pictures. He was on their Instagram feed. He was on the Facebook, you know, all of that. And his friends were like, oh my God, this is so good, man. You shot awesome today. That was amazing, unbelievable score. His family was sending him text messages. Whoa, you did so good. We're so proud of you. We saw your picture on the internet, right? And while he was shooting his qualification, he would go 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, high 9. Oh boy, here we go. And I'm standing there watching him shoot and it looks good, but that high 9 is a tell, right? So I'm going, okay, well this is fine. Hopefully we can get through this whole thing. You know, the next day we get, and he had to shoot his next, you know, arrows for the second qualification score. And he's walking down the sidewalk. All of his friends, saw you on Instagram, man. That was awesome. Your score yesterday. And he's like, thanks, yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. And we're walking along and I'm thinking, oh man. The first practice in was 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 over the top of the bale. 10 flag stick. Literally hit the flag stick, right? And he looks at me and he's like, it was working fine yesterday. Why is it not working today? Right? The day before, he could happily go about shooting his bow all by himself, for himself, having fun with all of his buddies. Then when he got the realization that people notice when he does well and he gets complimented when it does well, then the peer pressure factor shows up. Then he's focusing on something other than just having a good time with his buddies and just flinging arrows down range. So then that crucial step of how to just wait for the release to go without thinking about it that he never learned. Now, don't think I didn't tell him how to do this, but he wanted to just shoot his bow. So I said, okay, go shoot your bow. Don't worry, we'll take care of it when the time comes. And he's seen me work with other kids who have cleared that step. So he knew exactly what was happening. Even though he had a half a dozen clear examples, he knew that it was going to be this way. And he still I just want to shoot my bow. So here's what you got to do next, right? Triage in the middle of a tournament, right? What you say next is the most important thing. Because they're in a state at that particular point where they're like, oh my God, what is happening? It was fine yesterday, suddenly it's gone, and suddenly they begin to spin plates, right? So the first thing that you'll do is, okay, right now, we're just gonna do what we gotta do. We're just gonna get the arrows in the middle, and we're just gonna shoot bow. Just shoot your bow. Y'all hate it when I say that, right? Just shoot your bow, right? Don't do anything else. Don't pay attention to who's watching or who you think is watching. Don't pay attention to who's ahead of you or anything. Just shoot, right? So as we go along, let's see, why is this suddenly not working? Okay, I'm gonna walk over here. All right. Let's see, here we go. There we go. And here, and then here. Yeah, and it's like, all right, we're just going to do what we got to do to get it in the middle. And then when we get home, we'll fix it. But for right now, here's the plan. And this is where you insert the brilliant plan about what it is that you're going to do to keep their arrows in the middle, right? And usually I come up with some pretty harebrained stuff. But right now I'm saying, you know what? We're just going to do this. We're going to show them that no matter what happens, if the earth cracks open and swallows us whole right now, we're just going to make sure that the only thing that we pay attention to is just shooting the bow. This is the one thing. So what you can do is when you're kind of in this like rescue mode, we're in the middle of a tournament, we're having terrible performance, we've been confronted with something, we have no idea what's going on. The first thing is find one performance-based thing, one little thing. He was asking me for an explanation of what is happening, what's going on, do I have target panic? I was like, well, sure, but what we got to focus on right now is, but he wanted me to give him the full explanation of like what's happening and how he has the cancer, and we're going to have to like, put him in surgery now, but I wasn't going to do that. I was like, here's the thing. This is what we're going to do. So I gave him this little thing where you focus on your ring finger. When you get timid and when you get careful on a release aid, your ring finger gets weak on the release. And that's when your brain goes, hold on just a minute, let's just ease off of this. Let's not let it go off too soon, right? So you can watch a shooter's ring finger and tell whether they're going to do it or not, right? So I told him, curl that ring finger and really get that curled under the release, and let's focus on that. I want you to feel that ring finger heavy on your release. Only that. Make sure that your pull feels like it's coming from the target, and keep that ring finger heavy on the release. So I stood behind him going, ring finger, third finger, Quinn, pull that third finger, let's third finger. And I'm chanting behind him as he gets it under control. After he shot 5 zeros trying to figure out what was going on, he came all the way back to third place because all he was doing was focusing on his ring finger, and his accuracy came back, though it's temporary. That's just enough to get through the tournament. That's not something you can hang your hat on forever. It just gets you through the day, right? So if you change what you're trying to do for the shot, like the ring finger, sometimes you just got to go, you know what, today is really going to suck. So let's stop, forget trying to win this thing, and let's try to get a personal win by getting this under control. This is going to be bad. So I don't expect it to be great, so you can stop trying to make it great. Let's just work on this. So a success today is getting this under control and being able to fix it in the heat of battle and just get all the arrows on the paper, and then when we're done, we'll go home and sort it out, right? So you can say, we're doing this together, pull them into a little teamwork. Sometimes if someone, especially finger shooters, if they have kind of an anticipation or something, sometimes you just turn those knobs on the sight until it hits. Because, we all do that. Oh, it's me. I know it's me. Shooting arrows to the right, arrows to the right, arrows to the right. It's me. I know it's me. You should move your sight. No, it was my mistake. Sure, but we're in the middle of a tournament, so we need 10. So let's make mistakes that hit the 10. So move the knobs. Those cost extra money. You need to use those, right? So, micro adjustable sights are expensive, right? And sometimes you just got to swap releases. Just pull out a release, and that's usually the first thing that I do when I'm trying to all right, we're going to break this down. We're going to start over, and we're just going to square one, pick up all your missed steps. The first step is to find a release they haven't shot yet. Because if you can find a release that they haven't figured out how to punch, then you can teach them the right thing, right? So the first thing is you got to figure out, what is the habit? How can you create a new habit, and how can you make your brain choose the new habit, right? We can't really break habits once we're over about 10. We can't really break something that's already embedded, but we can put a new habit on top like a sticker, right? But you have to be committed. And you got to be committed to incremental learning. You can't shoot your first shot and expect it to be perfect. You have to go, all right, the first thing is I'm going to get this all the way back to full draw, and I'm going to put the sight in the middle. I'm not even trying to let it go yet. I'm just going to put the sight in it. How many of you, there's usually 2 types of folks, right? There are the types that have no problem sticking it in the middle, but you can't make the release let go. Who is those people? Come on now, I know you're out there. Okay, so who are the ones that can shoot the release just fine, but can't get the pin in the middle? Right? Usually when I do this thing in the room, it's usually kind of half and half. And usually that's the indicator of what is the step that you skipped. right? That's usually the first indicator of what we need to work on. And as coach, you'll have to do a little bit of experimentation. So the first thing, you find the misstep. What is it did they not do? How did they learn? Sometimes I'll ask questions. Tell me about your first day with a bow. How quickly did you get to the point to where you thought you could shoot a good score? How did you do that? What kind of sight were you using? Which release did you use? Get a little insight on how they started so you can get some clues on what to do next. So, each habit that someone forms usually has a trigger. And for the release aid thing, for people that can't get the pin in the middle, usually it's that stop, orient the pin in a certain location, and then slowly begin approaching and sneaking up on the target to get ready to pounce, right? That's usually the trigger, that slow approach to the middle, right? So if you figure out, and you can do that watching the end of the stabilizer, you can see how do they do it. A lot of times I'll just let them shoot their bow for a minute and just watch them. So then we got to figure out, okay, we need to reform this particular habit here. This is the thing. And then we'll teach them how to shoot a release aid first, then move the release aid over to the bow, then create a new trigger, a new way to approach the sight with the pin. And I'll go over that with you here in just a second. But we create a new trigger so the first time they draw the bow back and look through the sight, they see something totally new. So anytime you're trying to break a habit, find the trigger, eliminate the trigger, and it makes it easy for the habit not to just automatically begin. So then we create new good habits, then create a new trigger to launch that habit. So then we focus on the trigger, not the habit, right? Because the ultimate goal is we want to get ourselves to the point to where we're at full draw looking through the sight and we're just shooting the bow and our brain never looks at the release. I do a little demonstration when I'm doing camps and seminars. Some of you may have seen it, where I put these balance balls on the floor and you have to stand on it. And the demonstration, one, helps people with their posture, because when you fix your posture, you can balance on the balls much better. But the other demonstration is while I'm talking to the group and this person's standing on the balls, when I change my location in the room, they lose balance in the direction that I walk. So I'll stop talking, walk to the other side, and then start talking, and they lose balance over here because their brain goes, when I start talking. Your sight pin does the exact same thing. How many times have you been at full draw at league and you hear a noise to the right and you miss to the right? Right? Because your brain goes. So if you're at full draw and you put the pin in the middle and you go, okay, I got the pin in the middle, and then your brain has to go, to make the release work, your pin goes along with your intentions, right? So ultimately, that's what you're going to learn. Now, release technique. The secret is in how you're using your hands. A lot of people just use their hands to control the release aid so that it won't fire, right? So these are the things that you're looking for. Your hands, you have to figure out how to make your hands soft. And by that, you can hold the release firmly without your muscles being hard. Is that easy to understand? It's kind of a hard thing when I start trying to convey a feel, right, without actually having to hold your hand and say, this is what it feels like. And in a seminar or workshop, that's what I do. I walk around and say, all right, this is what it feels like. And they go, oh, right? So your wrist, a lot of times people have their wrist is too hard because they're holding the release like this. So their release can't be flexible enough to change directions. Ultimately, the power or the pressure at full draw has to be pointed at the end of the lever, right? So if my wrist is stiff like this, my elbow has to be high. How many of you work with people about high elbows? Your elbow is high. Elbow is high. You got to get that elbow down, right? It's not really about the elbow. What it really is about is the wrist. So if you let the wrist break, then the elbow can change angle. Can everybody see how that works? And depending on the length of this segment versus this segment right here is how much actual break that you need. So when you're teaching somebody how to come to anchor and keep their elbow down, tell them this is a triangle right here. So when they draw the bow back and you're set and you're going to go to anchor, instead of picking the whole unit up with your elbow, right, you make the triangle bigger like this. And in order to make the triangle bigger and touch your anchor, your wrist has to have some degree of flex. Some people it looks pretty straight. Some people it has a pretty pronounced flex. It's all dependent on what the length of your segments are. But the flex, or at least the joint has to be mobile so that you can fit your body inside the bow, right? Okay, so your thumb and pinky tension affect the dexterity of your fingers. So everybody try this. Take your pinky and your thumb and touch them together like that really hard, and then note how that affects the dexterity of your other three fingers. You see how they become a little stiff and hard to move, right? But then when you let go, you have full feel and dexterity, right? So you have to pay attention when somebody's holding a release, or if they're shooting fingers, if that pinky and thumb are very hard, or if they've really got that thumb bar on a hinge release and they've got that baby cranked up, right? They're not going to be able to actually activate the release because the hardness of their hand won't allow their fingers to move. Those release aids are designed specifically to move with your form. So if you hold something hard, the release won't move. So then your brain has to look at it and then start moving it to make it fire. And there's where we have the problem, right? Because you can't track two things at once. You either got to pay attention to what you're doing on the target or pay attention to what you're doing back here on the release, right? You can't do both. So the J hook is kind of the term that I use on how to hold the release. Many people try to hold the release a little bit too shallow. So that makes their hand tense, so the release can't work. If you hold it so deep that your hand doesn't have any dexterity, the release won't move well either. The release is designed to sit in that flat segment right there. So when you're holding the release, this flat part of your finger should feel like, you're not going to take a picture and get it right, but it will feel like this part right here is flush to the target face when you're at full draw. If your index finger feels like it's normal to the target face and not like this or like this, if it feels normal to the target face, you got it. The next time you pull your bow back, consider that and you'll be able to feel that. It's really easy to feel. Okay. So I preach this over and over and over and nobody ever does it, but you have to learn the release before you pick the bow up. All of y'all got a cabinet full of release aids, right? I'm a past release aid designer. My favorite guy was the guy with the release aids dangling from his quiver like a big chandelier. And he needed to change the release every other shot to, keep it fresh, right? I love those guys because that keeps me in business, right? But it doesn't really matter what true ball release that you pick, right? The stretch technique, I'm going to show you that in a minute, works any release. It works any hinge. It works any button. No matter what, the technique is the same. I walked out and didn't pick up my bow, or I could do a demo that, you hear the coaches say, you must use your rhomboid muscles. You must just pull. You don't do anything with your hands. You just pull. Well, I can drag somebody all around the room with a release aid by pulling, but it won't fire unless I let my hand move, right? So the way that works, and with a thumb button, right, your thumb is attached here to the base of your palm, right? And when you hook a nice hook with the release, your release has a little bit of flex, and when you put power and draw the bow, naturally the power of your pull is located around your index finger. So that will change this angle right here to your arm. So instead of it being straight, it'll be a little bit cocked like this, because the power has to be pointed at the end of the lever. All right? So with that angle misaligned like this, that stops a hinge release from working. But if you let your palm stretch, if you let your palm get longer like this while you're pulling against the bow, you're using that pressure between you and the bow, and you just let your palm become slightly weak as you're pulling your hand straight off of the release, this line right here aligns itself. And I'm showing you with a lot of movement so that you can see it. But the reality of it is, if you're standing there with your nose against my wrist, you can't actually see that move. I can feel it, but you can't see it, right? So don't think that there's a big change in the release. If you see, as coach, if you see a big change in the release aid, they're not doing that right. Something's out of joint and you got to check it out, right? But with that same exact stretching motion, right? I'm pulling my hand out of the release. Can everybody see that okay? Right, this is kind of hard, but when you pull your hand out of the release, watch my thumb right here. So when I pull that, right, you see how my thumb gets farther away from the release? So if I draw back to full draw and hook my thumb over the thumb barrel of the release and just pull my hand straight, I press the trigger without even thinking about it. But the key is to set your trigger heavy enough to where you can really wrap your thumb around it and get some meat around the trigger, so that you're not being too careful with it. Because if you're being too careful, you'll let go of it as you apply pressure. With the hinge, you'll let go of it as you apply pressure, right? So the first thing, ring finger, ring finger, ring finger, keep that ring finger, button or hinge. When you're teaching someone with a hinge release, teach them to operate the hinge without a thumb bar. Because the thumb bar is a great thing to draw the bow back without accidentally letting the angle change. But if you use the thumb bar to haul the release back, you have too much pressure and tension wound up against the release won't operate as it's designed, and it won't fire without you switching your brain to it to consciously make it let go. And we know now, if you look at it mentally, your pin goes to the right, if you're right-handed, okay? So then after you've done that, you've learned how that release aid technique is, you've learned how to do it, and I use just a piece of string. There's a trainer, a stretchy trainer with like a compound wall. You know, it feels like a compound bow. You can get it from Lancaster, and it's called a Morin trainer, M-O-R-I-N. It's expensive because it's handmade, but it's a really good mimic to a compound bow. It gives you the feeling of the wall, it gives you the feedback, but you can just use a length of release rope too, right? And you can carry that length of release rope in your pocket. While I was working on my shot issues, I carried my release and a piece of string in my pocket, and every time my hands were free, I was clicking, 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 mastering that technique. So I mastered the technique separate from the bow by watching it first, right here. I'm just like watching it work. Like this. Okay, that's the technique I want to use. Okay, all right, I can feel it, it works. And once I decided, then I set it here and I start shooting it like a bow. And then I stretch, and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm making sure that my shoulders are nice and level, making sure that my elbow, everything looks parallel. I can do this in the mirror, I can point at the mirror, I can do all these different things, and I can watch myself train, and I'm actually teaching myself new, better technique. I'm not just exercising my bow limbs, flailing away at a blank bale. I hear from people all the time, I'm trying to fix my target panic. I've shot for 3 weeks on a blank bale and nothing is different. The problem is when you move to the bow, you use the blank bale long enough to get the technique working on the bow, because the bow feels different than the piece of string or the trainer. So you move that to the bow, then the target is really the thing that causes the problem, right? I'll kind of demonstrate that. Some of you have a pen and paper out in front of you. grab a pen and then autograph your name, just like you're signing a check or something. Autograph your name like 4 or 5 times really quick. I'll give you a second to do that. So when you do that, you just flash it down, just, you know, and all of the different attempts at signing your name look very similar. It's almost like a fingerprint. They can identify you from your signature, right? Now, pick one of those signatures and take your pen and exactly trace one of those signatures. So now you can see that you're holding the pen a little harder, you're moving slower, you're making little mistakes, right, as you go through that step. That is a direct correlation between blank bail and shooting at an X-ring, right? So now, let me show you how the close range technique works. So what the close range technique is it's basically a fancy activated visualization. If you have trouble making the release fire, or if you have trouble putting the pen in the middle, you pull the target so close and make it so big that you can't get it wrong. Then you can desensitize yourself from being anxious when the pen is in the yellow. That the pen being in the yellow is just part of shooting the bow rather than the end of the shot. Everybody knows what I'm talking about there, right? So you desensitize yourself by aiming at a target up close. You'll figure out that aiming is not a step. Aiming is a side effect of good form. We all treat aiming like a step, don't we? Draw the bow back, we put the pen in the middle, and we pause everything and get very still. And we get the pen in the middle, then we look at the release and start trying to make the release work, right? If aiming is a step, you're not shooting the bow, you're aiming the bow. I can set the bow in the floor and orient that so that the pen is sitting dead center in the target. That's not going to get me a 10. You have to actually shoot the bow to get a 10. So what I tell people to do is to visualize letting the bow go, not visualize getting the bow still. When you're in that shoot-off situation and you're like, this is it, I got to hit this one, visualize the follow-through rather than getting it still and the moment of release. That will get what you want, right? Aiming is not a step. If you have good, clean form, the bow will be still. If you have good, clean form, you'll have great pressure built up between your hands, the bow, and the release. When that pressure reaches a certain point of alignment, the release fires. So imagine this. Your pressure makes the bow still and fires the release. The pressure settles everything down and centers it on what you're looking at. And then at the right moment, the release lets go without you looking at it. How cool would that be, right? I've had one kid in the last several years come to that conclusion all on his own. He went to nationals last year. Was it last year when we went to nationals with Blaze and Roy? I think it was. It was last year. Blaze comes to me, he goes, I said, how'd it go? Oh, I missed my first arrow, but I shot 59 X's inside out. Ooh, how'd you do that? He says, you know, I don't really know. I like realized this thing. You don't actually have to think about the release to make it fire. If I just stand there looking at the sight and keeping everything strong, the release just works. He said, I just stopped thinking about the release and it just started going in. And he had a nickel-sized group in every single one of his targets. The most amazing thing I've ever seen. And he was like, you don't actually have to think about the release. I was like, thank you, you're now my favorite. Right? So he like figured it out. So to help you figure it out, you can do an activated visualization. Now here's how you can do it with your signature. So take your pen and hover it over the top of your signature And then sort of start off slowly and practice signing on top of your signature. Just sign, 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 sign. And then when you're ready, when you get it up to top speed, just touch the pen to the paper and just sign it right on top. Just kind of flow with it and just put it down and just put it on there. I'll give everybody a second. That just kind of lines right up, doesn't it? When you practice enough and to where you can turn your brain off and just let that memorized motion work for you, it just goes in. It just lands right on top of it. Most folks are shocked at how easy that works, right? So what the walkback method does is you set the target up close, right? Let me check my time here. Okay, I got 15 minutes. So you set the target up close, and then you can't get it wrong, so you're just hammering the X out of it. And it's so easy, you can start creating habits. So you're very present and you're very deliberate about every move you make. You don't follow through without thinking about it. Everything is calculated and exact, and each step is underlined with a little pause and a tad bit of dramatic extra, right? So you'll go, release on the string, fingers, grip, target. Okay, I'm ready. Go. Boom. With a little pause in between each one to underline that step so that you're deliberate. So you're making your conscious controller, prefrontal cortex, you're getting bored. Your executive goes, man, this sure is mundane and boring. I'm going to create an automatic program so I don't have to focus on this anymore. So it makes that automatic program and tucks it back there in the file cabinet. Here's the new trigger. Are y'all ready? This is the most important part. Most important part. Here we go. Magic secret. Instead of drawing the bow back and anchoring and then hunting the target down like we do, you would never do that with a rifle trying to shoot a target at 100 yards, would you? You look at the target and you put the rifle in front of your eyeballs, right? So instead of drawing back and settling in without respect to the target and then hunting it down and then coming to it, look at the target, put the glass in the middle of the target. Just look past everything, put the glass in the middle of the target, and then put the peep in front of your face. When you look through the peep, the dot is already in the middle of the target. And the first time you do that, your brain's going to go, ah, and the pen's going to leave. Like, whoa, what are you doing? Easy, right? So you'll have to give that a minute, and you'll have to redo that step a few times. Once you get that down and you start building that procedure, you'll start off at, say, 7 yards. Just beat the X-ring out of the target. You can't get it wrong. I'm talking like 25 games, maybe 50, right? I mean, really groove it in. Then move it 2 yards. Do 25 games, maybe 50. Move it 2 more. 25 games. Move it 2 more yards. 25 games. So you're slowly increasing the difficulty as you gain mastery over the process. And before you know it, you'll have it all the way to the wall, and you're shooting amazing scores that you didn't think were possible because you practiced signing your name before you actually did it. Under control, and I have a new form, I have a new technique, I have all of that working for me. I still revisit 10 yards. I'll set the target up, I make everything as real as possible, and shoot scores, write it on the scorecard. I do everything as it is, and that's a visualization technique. I can see what it looks like to shoot 30x games at will, over and over and over and over, and constantly seeing that changes your expectations, right? Your brain won't go, yeah, but it's only 10. All it knows is the technique and what it sees, and it works. You'll notice that your shot speeds up, it gets faster, it gets more efficient, and if you're not 18, You can't be holding full draw 12, 18 seconds. You know, I can't be doing that chance bow Beth, standing there like a statue, you know, waiting on your release to go off. You can't do that, right? The older you are, the less window of time that you have to shoot your best shot. So if you're extremely efficient about how you get the pin in, how you get the peep, and how you activate, you can get your shot off in 6 seconds rather than 12. And a good, brisk, fast shot wins. Careful misses. If you want to bet, let's say if we could actually bet on the Vegas game. And you know how the Kentucky Derby, they like walk the horses out in front of you and you like pick them out, you watch them walk around. If you go to the practice range and stand there and watch which pros are coming off the line first on a consistent basis are the ones who's going to be in the shoot off. Try it this year. It's right every time. You can predict it with terrifying accuracy just by watching them. If you watch first round, second round, and you just keep watching, those same guys will be coming off the range because they got their shot together. So if they have their shot together and it's working and it's super fast and it's going, right? They don't have to think. So they can just shoot bow and they can get the arrows out of their quiver and into the X-ring before that voice in their head can go, I don't think you can do this, right? We all know that guy, right? So skipping steps as you go through this process. If you skip the step about learning how to shoot your release, it's not going to work for you. If you skip the step of shooting your bow a bunch, like 50 games at 7 yards, it's not going to work because those old habits are strong. And when you stop the process in order to get the pin in the middle or to fight whatever it is that you're fighting, that old habit's going to take over and just do it for you. So you'll be practicing the same old stuff. I say this thing right here, I've been saying it for 20 years and people skip the steps, right? Because we're all so eager and anxious to see how it's working. Let me just jump out to 20 yards and see how it's working. It takes 2 ends to get back to what you were. It is super easy to stay the same. That's why so many people are good at it, right? To like spend the time and the energy it takes to like walk that back without skipping steps or shooting tournaments in between or any of that. The time and energy and dedication that takes, not many people will do that. And that's why 5% of the people do 100% of the winning, because they will do that, right? So one more thing. I've got one tiny little tip. If all else fails, everybody can use this technique. This is ATA Show Special. So let's see if I have sound.
We're at the Lancaster Classic. I got Chance Bob up here. He just whipped my butt in the match.
Let's see here. Hang on.
Sometimes you need somebody like this guy to just give you a 27. So I'm going to show you how to make Chance shoot a 27. Are you ready? So once all the arrows are good, before they score, just get the pins out of the target like this. Get the pins out of the target. When you need that 27, you just take the target, just like that right there. And then line judge, right? Come over and just call out.
Right. So if all else fails, you can do that too, right? All right, so thank you very much. Who has questions? We have a little bit more time before they run us out of here. Who has questions? Yeah.
When you're coaching kids any age, at what point in time do you step in before it becomes too big of an issue? Do you wait for them to turn around and look at you like, what the hell am I doing? Or is there a point where you need to step in to say, okay, look, you didn't listen to me before, but you're going to have to start now?
If it's team kids, you know, your team kids that see you every day, you're like dad. All right, and if it is your kid, you're definitely dad, right? So they're not going to listen to you and they're not going to do what you want them to do until they beg you to tell them what to do. So let them tell you what they want. The first major lesson that I had to learn as coach was that I can't want it bad enough for them. You see all these hyper talented kids that are just like, I don't love it that much, and you got to watch them go run dirt bikes instead, right? But those kids, wait until they ask you. Wait until they go, why is this not working? What do I have to do to make this work? Please help me. Sometimes I'll make them ask twice. I'll go, are you sure? Let's think about this for a minute. Go home, shoot your bow a little bit, and then come back. Let's look at it again tomorrow, and then let me know. And I'll warn them, you're gonna have to stop doing what you're doing, and we gotta totally like rework this. Are you ready to spend that time? Or do you wanna wait until after state, right? I give them a choice and I make that decision theirs. So that way it's their decision, they came to you, they asked you to do it, so therefore they're gonna listen, and they're at least gonna be moderately successful going through the steps. And when you give them guidance during that process, they'll actually listen.
So let them have fun.
Let them have fun.
And then once
they gotta fall in love with it first.
right.
And if you're telling them what to do all the time, they get that at home and at school. They don't want to do that at the archery range.
So there's no certain timeline where you should step in before they ask you where you think it's going to be ingrained?
Nope. It's all a habit. It's already ingrained. There ain't anything you can do about that. And it's all a habit, and understanding that habits are connected to triggers. So you just pay attention to them and figure out what that trigger is, and you go ahead and be formulating the plan. Maybe even put that rescue release in your pack. Maybe even have them try it a couple times in the range before you show up to the event. So when they do have that come apart at the event, you can say, here, I have a genius plan. Let's just do this. And you can rescue them that day. And by the time they get home, they're going to be like, all right, what do we need to do to make that embarrassment not happen again? Right? They become really sensitive to what you have to say once, they've done it themselves and they're like, okay, that didn't work. Now what? Right? Who else? Yeah, over there.
What would you do if someone, let's say, it's a student of yours, shooting about 10 or 12, maybe 14 of those, qualifications over, now they're at match play, they start to cry. How do we turn it around back?
For kids especially, they don't have good control over that, right? So you need to be supportive, like be there. But it won't work for them to go, there's no crying in archery. Why are you crying? We're supposed to have fun, right? And I've had some kids that cried their way through matches and won. And we let them do that. And the other kids would stand in front of them so that they could cry and not feel embarrassed by the other kids standing there. So we let them do what they need to do, right? They'll come to you or they'll go to mom and dad for support if they need it. Just be standing there and let them do what they need to do, right? Because they don't have good control over that. And part of this whole archery thing is we're using sport to create an experience that's too hard for them so that they can cry and work it out and learn something new and become better using something safe like archery as a tool to test themselves against the dragon, right? And then when they slay the dragon all by themselves and you're standing there just if they need an extra spear, you hand it to them, right? And you're just standing there, saying, I'm right here if you need something, but go kill that thing, right? And then they do it. They own that experience, right? And they'll take that into adulthood and be able to use that in their normal working life. And that's kind of what we're doing anyway. Well, back there?
I have a question about draw cycle. So there's various amount of shooters that draw across their chest, come up, and then shooters that come straight back. So coming from across your chest and then coming up, is it possible to properly execute your shot going through using proper back tension when you come up? Shooting higher draw weights, it's easier to draw across your chest, so a lot of shooters do that. It's easier to draw like this with lower draw weight because a higher draw weight allows you to get away with some errors in, say, a 3D course with yardage. Is there a give and take? Should a shooter just sacrifice the draw weight, go lower, and just draw proper? Or
It can be dangerous, depending on how much holding weight that the bow has, to draw down here like this and then change muscle groups. And for most people, because they're under pressure, when they make that change, they don't do that in a consistent way. So you can get the same shoulder support, because that's why people do that. It's shoulder support, and they have to misalign their body so they can miss their body with their hands. So this is out of joint, right? And then they draw the bow back, and then they shift the muscles, and then it looks like this, you see? So what I teach people to do is to use their arms like levers, right? So imagine the brace height is low, right? So we got to keep our hands close together. But we can't do this. You see how our hands, that's why we have to do this, the dreaded world archery sky draw, right? But if you keep your hands level with each other and the arrow is level with the floor, a misfire will hit the target, right? But use this as a lever, because you see my hands, if I just go straight down, they get farther apart. You see that? So I got this lever, right? I have this lever, right? And I also have this lever right here. So if you teach people to use those levers with each other, you can actually be more efficient with heavier draw weights and be very safe with your shoulders. You see a lot of those guys that when it was cool when I was a teenager to shoot 100-pound bows and all that, and we did this whole thing to pull the bows back, we all have rough shoulder joints now because we had all those little micro injuries from doing that over and over, and now it's like calcified scars, So it's always a good idea to do that with the right range of motion and be biomechanically efficient when you're pulling the bow back, because ultimately you'll be more steady and more able to activate a good shot when you draw the bow in an efficient way, because you're using the same muscles to draw as the same muscles that make the bow still. Who else? Okay. We're done. All right. We're done. It's all over now. Why are you still watching? Turn that off. What's happening? Are we live? Is this on?